What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Claudia Bellafato here. We got a great show for everybody today. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out here live Monday through Friday on the DraftKings Network, our YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, all the great places that you normally get it here. We got a fun one today. We will tell you the real winner of Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals here in just a second. But Claudia, what do we got coming up today?
It was a wild one, probably one of the best games to start off the conference finals, which we will break down at the top of the show and then also be joined by the Celtics voice, new voice of the Celtics for next season, NBC Sports Boston's Drew Carter. And then sounding off, OTAs continue, we'll break down some football, and down bad. I didn't realize this was going to be one of the headlines. I can't believe we're dedicating a segment to it, but clearly this is important, guys. Red Lobster clawing its way through. We will have a special guest for that as well. Still, just didn't realize we were going to get there. So really, it's a mixed bag of a show today, but we're certainly going to talk a lot of basketball, specifically with the Celtics-Pacers game 1 that went down last night, 133-128 overtime win. A lot of people are saying the Pacers won that game. 10 seconds left, up by 3, and then they gave it away with a turnover, which was the name of the game, guys. Boston had 32 points off of their 21 turnovers. We have some sound from the coaches. Rick Carlisle saying it was his fault because he didn't call a timeout. Tyrese Halliburton saying it was their fault because they didn't have turnovers. I think it was a mixed bag of the two. Celtics still, though, a 9-point favorite heading into Game 2. GoJo, do you agree with some people saying that it felt like the Pacers had won that game up until the very end?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, absolutely they had won that game. It seems pretty obvious. And then they decided to, as soon as they had it in hand, give it away. That was textbook snatching defeat from the jaws of victory for a team that had gone out and it seemed had shell-shocked the Celtics on their home court. The real winner of Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals is everybody watching in the Western Conference right now, because I find it hard to look at what we saw on that court last night and feel overly worried about it if I'm the Timberwolves or the Mavericks right now.
I'm telling you, the only thing I thought about at the end of this game was, and for those, we've talked about this before, my son Mike, before every football game, would throw up. And sometimes, you know, when he had the light colored, like the white jersey, he would make the mistake of drinking like orange Gatorade before the game, and he'd throw up, and you'd see it down his jersey. I feel that mark has got to be on every Pacer. They threw up all over themselves. That's the point I was getting to. They absolutely vomited. I wish we had a puking sound, because that's what would need to be played right now, because that's what they did. I have no idea how the rest of this series is going to go. There's no doubt they have the confidence. You go in with confidence anyway, that they can get it done. Tie game at halftime, 1-point game going into the fourth quarter, and then what we saw at the end. They were primed to win this game, including the fact of 21 turnovers, including the fact that Boston actually outscored them in the paint without Porzingis, which is something that the Pacers have been doing to everybody else this year. All that being said, inbound the ball. Now, you know, the other team is out there trying, and they knew exactly what they had to do is stop that inbound if they could. That's why you do it before you foul, is to see what you can get. So who knows? Should they have called a timeout? You know, I hear the breakdown of the game: run toward the guy, don't run away from him on the inbound. There's a lot of the technical things you want to talk about in inbounding. Either way, credit Boston for forcing that, credit Brown for hitting that three-pointer, and then once it went to overtime, not going to lie, I picked the Pacers to win one of these games in Boston. I thought I was going to get it right out of the gate. Once they went to overtime, in all honesty, I thought, I just don't see how this is going to go the Pacers' way. They kept it close for a bit, and then it was done. But my God, just the vomit all over themselves at the end of this game.
We'll talk about who almost had a reverse vomit situation towards the end of this game here in just a second, as we try and figure out how the Boston Celtics pulled this out. But Claudia mentioned off the top, and I want to get to the sound from Tyrese Halliburton after the game, talking about some of those final sequences there and what ultimately damned this team.
That's not on him. That's not on him. Us as players, we got to do a better job. I had 2 bad turnovers that I feel like cost us the game, one in fourth and one in overtime. So, you know, I understand he's protecting us, protecting, me as well. But I'll take that more than he should. I got to be better, and I will be better in game 2, and we'll respond the right way.
And Dad, that was him responding to Rick Carlisle going up to the podium and saying what he said, which I'm sure was music to your ears as somebody that's constantly reinforcing it's the player's job and not the coach's.
And wear the hat, right? I am always one of those. Players know who wears the hat of responsibility and who's trying to throw that hat off. And he's exactly right. You know, that Carlisle saying I should have called the timeout. And Tyrese is like, no, we're on the court. We got to make the play. A, you got to get the ball in. B, you got to not turn the ball over, bouncing it off your foot or trying to reverse your way and dribbling it out of bounds. And the players understand that. Pacers know exactly, Mike, what they had last night. They know exactly what they were in position to do. They certainly, as I said, have the confidence that they can pull it off in game 2. But who knows? I know the line didn't change a whole lot, that's for sure. But that had to give the Celtics fans an absolute scare last night.
I mean, it should give the Pacers a ton of confidence is what it should give them. You've got a Celtics team that's given up game 2 like it's on sale for most of the playoffs so far, and a Pacers team that walked into their home court in game 1 and Claudia was able to establish their tempo. The thing that was most telling to me was listening to Jaylen Brown talk to Lisa Salters after this game. Jaylen Brown, who hit the game-winning shot that sort of saved the ass of him and Tatum, who were a no-show for the final couple minutes of this game in crunch time when the Indiana Pacers took over. And he talked about, hey, we've got to adjust to their pace. They've been in a dogfight throughout the playoffs so far, mentioned their relatively easy path. That looked like a man who saw their stuff on tape, who saw them during the regular season, but somehow for a Boston Celtics team that's been the perennial Eastern Conference Finals attendee, they looked surprised by the speed of the postseason that came from this Indiana team that certainly made their name doing this.
And I think you used the word shell-shocked, which I have to agree that's sort of what I saw too. And I said this heading into this series, everyone's just giving it to the Celtics. And I said, hold on, they haven't faced a squad yet who has 7 guys averaging double digits. This is going to be a tough offense to try and defend and adjust defensively throughout the game. And so I look at this line now for the series, the number of games, it's set at 5.5, and the under is minus 230. So the books are saying, okay, yeah, Pacers kept that one close. We don't care. It's still going to go 5. I look at this plus money at plus 185 to say this goes to 6. Senior, you're nodding your head.
Yeah.
I think that's a good price.
Oh, listen, I picked the Pacers to win it in 7, and I'll stick with it. It's only one game, and they were right there in it. So, yeah, I would absolutely jump on that without question. But, man, like I said, the Pacers with the day off today, they shot better field goal percentage and three-point field goal percentage than Boston last night. So they shot better than them. They, as I said, they got outscored in the paint. We talked about the biggest differences, Boston being a three-point team and the Pacers being a paint team, while Boston handled themselves in the paint, and the Pacers shot a better percentage. They made less shots, less threes, a couple less threes, but had a better shooting percentage of threes than the Celtics did in three-point land. So this was a game of, whatever their weakness was became a strength a little bit. I was surprised with Boston in the paint, again, without Porzingis. So, and the thought is maybe game 4 that he may be back. And we do have to remember, we keep calling Boston the best team in the league, the best team in the league. They're doing all of this now. The competition, you can say, wasn't the greatest in the world, but they have been doing it all without Porzingis, who's been had a career year, especially on the defensive side.
They have, no doubt, and that deserves to be factored in here. This is also a Boston team, however, that has, as the season's gone along, they were talked about coming into this year because of their starting 5, their top 6, and have been lauded more and more for their depth. So I do think this is a team that's been so good and so deep that most people are going to kind of overlook that, but it's a valid point here. Dad, you mentioned the Pacers. They were statistically in this postseason right now, the best three-point percentage shooting team in the NBA this playoff. So that's been consistent with who they've been. It makes sense. They're rolling in hot off the last series. Boston's had a little bit more time off. There's some things you can sell in there, but man, oh man, I feel like for folks around Boston, it's going to come back to what you saw down the stretch here, Dad, because for most of this game, like, you got a banner performance from Drew Holiday, who had 20 points in this game, had one of his best games of the postseason in terms of offensive output, and defensively was, again, I think he was All-NBA first team defense again this year. He was the guy that on that Tyrese Halliburton turnover late in the game was the primary defender and helped that out. Like, You got quality performance at home from, calling Drew Holiday an other is probably disingenuous. I think he's a little bit more important to the team than that. But you got that performance, and yet in the final minutes of this game, Dad, as Indiana clawed their way back in, who is it? It's Drew Holiday and Derek White is the ones that are the primary ball handlers and facilitators, while Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum just sort of hang out. Now, Jaylen Brown bails them out with the last-second shot to tie the game after Indiana, as you so aptly put it, barfs all over themselves. But Jason Tatum made his last field goal in regulation with 9:44 left in regulation and did not score points again until 2 minutes and 27 seconds were left in overtime. Like, that is wild to me.
Yeah, that is. But it's also one of Boston's feather in their caps is basically all their guys are a threat to score. We know who they're leaning to, obviously, with Tatum and Brown. And Brown showed it with the three-pointer, and Tatum showed it with 10 of his 36 in overtime. So he showed up there. But they relied on others. You mentioned Drew Holiday. I get not mentioning him as another. I get it. But he scored 28, and that was a season high. So you have to mention that others step up, and usually you do see this at home with those other players that step up. For both these teams, all the starters, all 10 starters were in double figures. So, but you have to look at who stepped up because it looked early on like Boston was pulling away. Pacers would come back. Boston would pull away with a little more. Boston would come back to, like I said, tied at halftime, 1-point game in the fourth quarter, that you were just sitting there. Claudia, you're a Boston fan. You're watching that game. Were you just going, I mean, where was your uh-oh meter as Boston, as they would pull away at times, just couldn't hold it there, and you see the Pacers keep coming back and then take the lead?
Senior, my uh-oh moment was when the Pacers were down 12-0, because I said, this is when Boston's going to say, okay, we're good. We got this. We're at home. We have this nice juicy lead to start. We're just gonna let it go. And that you can't do that with this Pacers squad because they're going to run you up and down the court. They're going to throw a million things at you. They're going to, yes, maybe make some turnovers, but then they're going to fight back for the ball. So that was my uh-oh moment. That might sound silly, but it's true. When the Celtics get a little too much confidence in an early lead, that's when I say, yep, this isn't good. The one thing that I'm curious of, too, you guys mentioned Drew Holiday. The fact that he paired with Tatum and Brown for 90 of the 133 points. And maybe we'll ask Drew this when he comes on too. How much more of that are we going to see? Because when the Celtics got Porzingis and Drew Holiday, two very different conversations, of course, because two different role players. But I thought Drew Holiday would have a little bit more of an impact than he has up until this point. So if we get another big game from him like this, then yes, maybe it will go 5. But I don't know if that's something we can necessarily rely on with him, GoJo.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see if he can maintain that level because both ends of the court, it was incredible stuff. Drew Holiday popped off the page last night. And I do ultimately think one of my big takeaways as we shift to looking at the Western Conference, and like you said, we'll have Drew on later. We'll be able to dive even more to this Boston Celtics series going forward. But the question the thing I still do come away with saying is they're not winning a title without Porzingis in the middle. You saw at the end of that game in crunch time, between Miles Turner and Pascal Siakam, when they saw Al Horford in the fourth quarter, they saw food. They saw an absolute feeding frenzy in the middle of the paint there. Both of those guys, 23 and 24 points respectively. They knew exactly where they could go for a win when they needed it most down the stretch. And that's exactly the place we talked about them missing Kristaps. So, Claudia, as we look at the Western Conference Finals that's going to get started tonight, I think that's kind of where we train our eyes to begin with for this entire series is the matchup that's going to be going on, certainly in the backcourt with guys like Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. But I think as much as anything, it's down low considering the kind of bigs that we're going to see in the West and how that does translate to what we'll eventually see in the finals.
Yeah, and according to Anthony Edwards, their head coach is going to keep them in check for this game, which I think is always refreshing. And I just have to say, every time Anthony Edwards speaks now, we listen. This is what he had to say about his head coach keeping them in line.
It starts with our head coach, Chris Finch. He comes in every day, comes to work, he gets there early. He's thinking of ways to get me and Kat open looks. He's thinking of ways to get Mike and Rudy open looks. He's thinking of ways to get Jaden involved. He's trying to keep Nas in it to get him involved. He's just a great coach, and he don't sugarcoat anything with anybody. Like, if Kat up, he gonna get on Kat. If I'm up, he gonna get on me. If Rudy up, he gonna get on anybody that's messing up throughout the game. And I think that's what makes him the best coach in the NBA to me, because no matter who it is, no matter how high the player is on the pole, he's going to get on you from start to finish. And it starts with the head of the snake, and he's the head of our snake.
No sugarcoating in Minnesota. That leads us to Cash It or Trash It, presented by DraftKings. Stay tuned to hear everything DraftKings has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Timberwolves -170 to win the series. Game 1, they're 4.5-point favorites tonight. Total 208. Total number of games 5.5. The over juice to -160. After all this confidence the Timberwolves seem to have, -4.5. feels like a pretty safe number for me. GoJo Senior, curious what you guys think. Senior, are you cashing or trashing a Game 1 Timberwolves win and cover of 4.5?
4.5. I'm going to cash that. I think they are going to cover that. I'm looking forward to this series. My biggest question is going to be on the inside here. Dallas, they had the inside on Oklahoma City. But in this one, you got Towns and you got, and Gobert. So, how is Gafford and Lively going to do? Are they going to, work on Gobert? Is it PJ Washington on Towns? How are they going to match up, size-wise? I think that's going to be the issue for Dallas. You have obviously your stars and Anthony Edwards and Luka going to do what they're going to do. But I look at the other players and how they're step up, and I'm looking on the inside here for Minnesota. So barring foul trouble, which is always can be a situation with Karl Anthony Towns, I'm going to cash this one, Mike.
I'm going to cash this one too. I think the environment in Minnesota where you want to talk about listening to whatever Anthony Edwards says. I believe bringyass.com now takes you to the Minnesota tourism website in the state. They have moved on that quickly after that post-game sound. For anyone that missed it, Ant was on with Charles Barkley and the Inside the NBA crew. Charles said he hadn't been to Minneapolis in 20 years, which the lie detector test determined was a lie. But immediately upon hearing that, Anthony and Edwards uttered the words that I think are now going to be the rallying cry for the state and certainly for this series, which is bring your ass on over and let's do this thing. And I think they're going to take their cues from Ant and come out shot out of a cannon to this game. I'm with you, Dad, though. It's Lively and Gafford who were able to go out there and bully's the wrong word, but they were able to physically push around Chet Holmgren in a much thinner interior on that Oklahoma City roster. Claudia, looking at this team now, Karl and Gobert are definitely a different task. They're still guys that every once in a while have to beat the allegations of going in and getting pushed around themselves, but certainly physically, just on the surface alone, a different task altogether. Yeah,
I was taking a look at the player props yesterday. Karl Anthony Towns' number set at 8.5 for the rebounds. That's even money. That's a play I do like to the over. Gobert's the first name that comes to mind, of course. 12.5 is a bit too high for me. I do think that they're going to have, a double roll there with the boards. But in terms of the number, I think the value's with the 8.5 on Cat. And I will say the biggest difference, Senior, you mentioned it, is going to be that paint presence. It's going to be the second chance opportunities because Minnesota is rebounding at the highest rate in the postseason. Dallas in the regular season allowed the 5th most rebounds. And not much has changed. They look a little bit better in the post. But I think that's going to be the difference. So if you are looking for a prop, I would look to Cat for that even money on the over.
And I do think one of the other big differences in this one is Dallas is actually playing better defense.
Yeah.
We maybe don't have to whisper that anymore. It's like the expectation is they don't, but they're playing better defense. So that you got to throw that into the mix as well.
I think it was over the last 20 or so games of the season coming off of the All-Star break, they were more or less the number one defensive team in basketball by certain metrics. So this is absolutely a team that certainly with the acquisitions that we talked about at the trade deadline, the way they drafted this year, but also just, I think, added buy-in from their stars. Luka Doncic has decided defense is something that matters a lot more to him this season. And because of that, the overall effort's improved.
Oh, wait a minute. We're in the Pacers locker room. Okay, I'm good.
Nasty.
The podcast audience just drove off the side of the road.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. As OTAs roll on this week, we get more sights and sounds from players and coaches. And Jets, of course, we're going to hear that a lot this preseason. Aaron Rodgers hoping to take more than just 4 snaps, which is what happened last season before tearing his Achilles. So hoping to put that behind him. Head coach Robert Saleh had this to say about the quarterback's return.
But for him to push the envelope, continue his rehab, he has no restrictions, and he looks good, man. The arm talent obviously is still there, but it's really just reacclimating to everything, and we're trying a bunch of new stuff too, and it's just trying to evolve within the offense.
Well, how is he doing in terms of, is he taking snaps under center?
He's doing everything.
Work related to handoffs and stuff that maybe he wasn't doing toward the end of last year?
He's doing everything.
He's doing everything. He's going to be back. So all of that excitement that Jets fans had, I guess you can just duplicate it into this season. Their first opponent on the road, San Francisco. Yikes. Niners only 5.5-point favorites. So, GoJo, what's your take on this whole situation with Rodgers under center?
I think it is fascinating hearing Rodgers and Saleh both go to the mic, because Rob Saleh has gone out of his way to be extremely complimentary and inviting and all the things with Aaron Rodgers. Like, he understands he got handed a Hall of Fame quarterback, and that can be the difference in your entire career. Aaron Rodgers understands that in a different way, because, Dad, where were you at? He stepped to the podium yesterday. Aaron Rodgers did, after an offseason full of headlines about him potentially being RFK Jr.'s vice presidential nominee and a million other podcast appearances. And one of the first things he says immediately is, I understand going into this year that if I don't perform the way that I'm capable of, we're probably all losing our jobs. Rob Saleh comes in with positivity, and Aaron Rodgers is like, oh no, if I don't do well, they're probably going to cut your head off too, which feels a little bit different for the 40-plus-year-old quarterback who knows he's on his way out of the NFL versus Rob Saleh, who I'd imagine would like to do this a fair amount longer.
Yeah, Rodgers threw out reality, because that's what happens when you bring in somebody like that. That's the coach and the GM is saying, okay, we're pushing all our chips in the middle on this guy. Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree that if it doesn't work with Rodgers, everybody's going to be gone. But, like you said, from Rodgers' standpoint, he's coming to the end of his career. But we're going to get the same kind of talk. It's not going to be as much because we went through this all last year. It'll be a little more guarded, I think, this year. With Aaron, let's see him get to that fifth game. I actually, for the Westwood One schedule release show, we had Kevin Harlan on, who calls the Monday night games for Westwood One, and the Jets are on the first Monday night game. And I said, did you play-by-play guys? Sometimes you write out these calls, these big calls at the end of games. Have you written out your call for Aaron Rodgers making it to the fifth play? Going farther than last season. But listen, just like we talk about what Ryan Poles and the Bears have done to put stuff around a young quarterback, I'm impressed with what's going on with the Jets with what they're trying to put around Aaron Rodgers. Bringing in Mike Williams, you have Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall came back incredibly well from the knee injury, but picking up 3 O-linemen in the offseason, then drafting the tackle out of Penn State in the first round as well. You know exactly, because you saw in 4 plays how many times Aaron Rodgers got knocked down and then his Achilles snapped. So they have to protect him more. So it had to be get the big guys in the offseason to protect him.
They certainly, from a just quality and personnel standpoint, absolutely improved that position and went out there with that effort. Mentioned Morgan Moses coming up from Baltimore, along with John Simpson, his former teammate there, Tyron Smith from the Dallas Cowboys. But, Dad, you know this as well as I do. In this day and age, the NFL, the first 4 games of the season are basically an extended preseason, especially now that we've lopped off another game. Fewer teams play their starters. It can be messy business up front. And you also know as well as I do that O-line is a position group that thrives on continuity and time under task together. If you look, in ESPN when we were there, used to have the ability to track offensive line combinations and how many snaps they were on the field together over the course of a long season. And when you look up towards the end of the playoffs and the Super Bowl, the teams at the end were almost always teams whose offensive lines had stayed healthy enough and together enough, long enough to get those quality and continuity reps together. Dad, in the beginning of the season, this is going to be a group that has not played a lot of football together in its current form. And so I still do think there's going to be some time to hold your breath, especially considering I know their pass rush waned a little bit over the course of last season, but starting out with the San Francisco bleeping 49ers does not make me feel warm and fuzzy if I'm the Jets.
So I'm wondering, Mike, you mentioned the three they picked up on like an initial depth chart. They have Tyron Smith, a starting left tackle, Simpson left guard, and Morgan Moses right tackle. You think Fashanu ends up starting the rookie O tackle from Penn State? Or do they and listen, I know a lot depends on what goes on in camp, whatever you can see with that, but I wonder if that young guy is going to be their starting day.
I don't think he's the day one starter for them, but unfortunately, based on recent history, I love Tyron Smith. That's a future gold jacket. It's one of my favorite players of the last decade, bar none. But unfortunately, in recent years, the only constant has been that he's had to miss time for one injury or another. I mean, that's just what happens over time with the body like that. And so, yeah, Olu is going to eventually have to play some games this season, and how they're able to get him up to speed and get ready for it. And then I will say, having Tyron in that room, having a guy of that caliber, who not just, Dad, is one of the best athletes to ever walk the face of the earth, but an incredible technician as well. You could not ask for a better teacher for Olu coming into the league than Tyron Smith, so he'll be ready.
All I have to say about Tyron Smith, for those that don't know, when he hurt his elbow, he wears a knee brace on his elbow. A knee brace
for a human
on his
leg.
elbow.
Big dude.
For a human leg. It
Something
goes on
for
his
human
arm.
leg he is putting on his human arm, which is an inhuman arm. So nothing.
He was at USC. So he and I were the same class coming out of high school, played in the Army All-American Bowl together. And I remember standing out at practice at those fields and just looking at the size of his hands. They had to have like sewn together sheets from a circus tent to put those around his hands, because normal human gloves weren't fitting that dude. It was just like a puppy with huge paws, where you knew eventually he was going to grow into a monster, and he did. And so, Dad, you look at the task he's going to be up against for this Jets team to start the season. We mentioned on the road at the 49ers in prime time to start the year, but then against the Tennessee Titans in week 2, another team with a very formidable defensive front over recent years. The Patriots, who when healthy were a team defensively up front. Now we know new era, but the personnel there, especially with a guy like Judon healthy, they're an absolute problem up front. So right out of the gate, before you get to Denver, you've got 3 sizable tasks up front for a team whose biggest question mark got some new answers, but still ultimately has to go out there and pass the test.
Yep, they do. And we'll see. We know what kind of offense that Aaron Rodgers likes. He likes to take the play clock down. He likes to get the offsides going for the other team.
Yeah, to that point, were you surprised they didn't bring in anyone else over, Nathaniel Hackett, to kind of steady that ship there for Aaron Rodgers after how bad it went last season without him?
No, I still think all their eggs are in that basket, and they feel, because of the relationship, that, you know, it's kind of like Bill Polian when you had Peyton Manning and they had, Painter as the backup. They basically said, if Peyton Manning goes down, we're screwed. Now, you can't come out and really say that anymore, but your relationship you have with your quarterback, you want that coordinator or quarterback coach to have the best relationship, and that is the best relationship. Hackett and Aaron Rodgers, the way they get along. So that's the one you have to play, and if Aaron Rodgers goes down like he did last year, well, you're basically done anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point here, and I think, God, if they didn't understand that before, and we've heard, stats for years, was it the old line about Peyton Manning that they used to talk about, basically asking about the backup of the Colts, like if the backup's in, there's no point in us talking about what's going to happen for the season. The Jets have gone out there and certainly tried to address that position differently than they did before by having Tyrod Taylor there, a guy who's been a starter in the NFL and been the adult in the room. But yeah, the stakes there are very, very clear heading into the 2024 season. Now, we already have the stellar reports coming out of OTAs that, hey, the ball didn't touch the ground for the first 90 minutes of practice when Aaron Rodgers was out there under center. I mean, Dan, I know that lights up your eyes.
Well, listen, that just makes me not want to watch the off-season program New York Giants Hard Knocks, because that's the kind of great material you're going to get. Hey, in this episode, the ball never touched the ground while the Giants were practicing, though that probably wouldn't happen for the Giants. Don't care about that stuff in OTAs. That's why one of the reasons don't care about that show. I don't care about watching anybody in the off-season.
The ball might touch the ground a few more times in Giants camp. Yeah. Coming up next, though, speaking of podcasters who play sports, is the Lakers' job all but in the hands of podcaster JJ Redick? We'll get to that next here on GoJo Golic.
here on GoJo and Golic to teach you how you can get swagged out for the conference finals, because there are 4 teams hoping to have, of course, that shirt that says the champions, but you can get them now. Boston, Warriors, no, they're not in it, but you could get the Timberwolves. You get the idea. I have it here. I know GoJo has his on. So you can head to the shop now, flex your teams. There it is. Look at him. You look good, GoJo. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
I feel good. My Pilates teacher told me I look lean the other day, so I'm on cloud 9. And I got to say, the shirt helps. It is form-fitting, but also very comfortable. Good material. Dad, I don't know about you. My body is very sensitive to abrasive materials on shirts. Despite being a big, tough outer exterior, I like to be wrapped in the finest of cloths. And I got to say, this is a nice, stretchy material. There's a little give to it, but it's soft to the touch. It's wonderful.
I enjoyed it. When I got it, it was just a little small to cut for me. It hugged me. I felt good, but it was just, I didn't know I was going to, if I wanted to be on air with my moobs, with a shirt that was too tight. And oh, by the way, your Pilates instructor was just saying that for you to re-up your membership. Okay. I mean, seriously. Right?
My Pilates instructor knew what time it was, man. I had been taking a month off because of back injury, focused on the diet a little bit. I was looking good and feeling even better.
80% nutrition. We all know that. But the shirt is good for moobs because it's black and there's a graphic.
It is.
So you should be fine.
You're right. You're right.
So if you want to rep your team or just cover your moves as GoJo, we'll get to that in a second, okay? We can get into that in a second. Shop the complete collection exclusively at DraftKings. Shop DraftKings.com. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Must be 21 plus to visit. The limited edition NBA Finals Championship Collection presented by DraftKings. And maybe for next year, you're looking for Lakers gear as they head into next season. You might be rooting for JJ Redick as we discuss him possibly being the new head coach of the Lakers. Potential Pat Riley in the making is what we're hearing from some NBA analysts, but it could be too much too soon for rookie head coach in the NBA. Former NBA player of 15 years, Channing Frye, had this thought about JJ Redick to the Lakers.
This is not a job. It's no offense to Detroit or Charlotte or San Antonio or OKC. This is not a let's learn your way through. They were crushing Darvin Ham for not having the right substitution patterns.
Yeah.
So for me, I wouldn't take that job. I would let, obviously Sam Cassell has been around the league a long time. I think he's great. I played for James Borrego. I think he's also great for that
Coach
job.
K, maybe?
I don't think Coach K's he's more of a college coach. Just stay retired, Coach K. You don't want these NBA problems. But to me, you need to bring in somebody who's going to command that locker room and who's going to say, Bron, I understand what you want to do, but this is my vision for the roster that we have. And also, the roster has issues. So you could be Phil Jackson.
Yeah.
And you're still going to have to deal with those things. So as a first-year coach, I wouldn't recommend that job for anybody.
Senior, why are you smiling like that listening to that one?
Because I was agreeing with a lot that he said until he was like, this coach go in and say, LeBron, I know what you want, but this is my vision.
Yeah.
No, that's the biggest difference here is I get it. It's not Charlotte. It's not Detroit. It's not OKC. You're not learning your way, even though OKC was the top seed. This is the Lakers. The expectation is unbelievably high. But Mike, we know this. It's different than any other team when you're taking over a team that LeBron James is on. You can't walk in and say, this is my way. We're doing it my way and not even listen or worry about LeBron. It's not going to work that way. So I agreed with a lot he said, but I don't think a coach is going to get away with is the wrong word, but I don't think that's how the relationship is going to start with whoever is the coach and LeBron. Hey, LeBron, I know you do your thing, but this is my vision of what we're going to do.
Yeah, listen, we love LeBron James around here, hashtag DK partner. And I've heard all of the things about how LeBron is actually staying away from the coaching search during this process and is leaving this up to the front office. But he does a podcast with JJ Redick, for God's sake. I'd have to imagine he's made it abundantly clear in ways that are pretty obvious, like mom dropping hints to you around the house, Dad, of her not wanting another massage chair for Mother's Day, making it pretty obvious to all involved that this is the guy that he's most comfortable with. And I think that's really the way to frame it. I understand what Channing's saying in terms of this being your entry point into NBA coaching and the fact that the situation is so different and it's so heightened. It's going into the Dallas Cowboys of the NFL, albeit with much more recent success in terms of championship accolades. But in terms of the expectation, the noise around the team, and a roster that isn't perfect. Like I heard Bill Simmons on his podcast already basically poo-pooing the Lakers in the current Western Conference, saying, all right, yeah, you're shuffling deck chairs on ultimately a play-in level team's Titanic when you look at the rest of the teams we're talking about in the West right now. And so, Dad, if you can put yourself in JJ Redick's shoes, which I mean, we're halfway there. You're a media member with a background in professional sports. Is this the kind of job that you would look at and see as appetizing on the way in?
Oh, I'm sure JJ would love it, because I don't think you turn down the Lakers if you want to get into coaching. And then, whether we believe LeBron or not that he's staying out of this, you have an ally in LeBron, right? You're doing a friggin' podcast with the guy, so you have an ally in him. And what I'll say, because people have said is he's Pat Riley-esque. Listen, I love what J.J. Redick does. I love hearing him talk basketball. But I'll say about him what I say about every first-time head coach, even those that have been offensive and defensive coordinators in the NFL or assistants in another sport and then become a head coach for the first time. We don't know. You have zero idea what they're going to do because they've never had to do it before. We can all say we think they'll do well, just like all the new head coaches in the NFL. Some will do fine and some will fall on their face, whether how much blame you want to put on them or not. So I have no idea what J.J. Redick will do. Maybe he'll coach it and hate it. Maybe he'll do it for the next 25 years. I don't know. But one thing I do know is what we don't know. We have no idea how he is going to be as a head coach, but we do know he knows basketball and he's friends with LeBron James. And that will be a feather in your cap if you're the coach of the Lakers.
And I don't want to make it sound like that friendship with LeBron James is like the nepotism of this that disqualifies him. He's a guy that already interviewed with the Charlotte Hornets and clearly wants to do this. Like he has interest in it, and that's why these things have popped up here. And you mentioned he's a guy with an incredibly high basketball IQ. He's the kind of player, Dad, and we always talk about this. Sometimes all-time great players have a difficulty going in and getting in the coaching chair because they were so good in a way that only translates to them or that only they could understand. You play with Reggie White and tell stories for years about how he couldn't teach the rest of you guys the things that he did to be great here. J.J. Redick, the hallmark of his career was the work that he put in, was having to understand basketball at that high level in order to succeed for as long as he did. And that kind of stuff can usually translate better to coaching because you're used to having to express that idea to other people. And I do think having the respect of, forget the kinship in the podcast with LeBron, he seems to be a basketball mind that LeBron respects. And we know the most difficult task for any head coach in any sport is to walk in and get immediate buy-in from the best player on your team.
Listen, I agree. And even the other coaches that we've talked about, that have gone, had no coaching experience and went to be a head coach, they all have great sports minds and great minds in their sport, I should say. So that's not the question, right? That's never. Charles Lee takes a job with the Hornets, a guy under Budenholzer for a couple of different stops. Charles Lee is like what was one of the guys that was like, yeah, he is going to be a head coach. And I'd say the same thing about him in Charlotte. We have no idea. Once you sit in that chair, yes, and go to any sport, when you get elevated to the head coach, you say, yes, they have the qualities. This is a quality. That's a quality. This is a quality. We think it should translate, but we don't know. We don't know until they get in that foxhole and then the decisions that they made. And then in the heightened place like the Lakers, where like the Cowboys or like the Yankees, everything is torn apart. Every little thing, as soon as Darvin Ham made a rotation, what people thought was a rotation mistake, they jump all over him. So, the spotlight's on you pretty quickly.
It is, but at the same time, one of the hallmarks of almost every coach that you've ever been around is the hubris to believe that they can go in and do better and do different in those situations. That's why you're exactly right. You won't turn this down. I understand Channing Frye's fears of this situation, but if you're seriously going to get into head coaching at any level, you cannot walk in with that kind of fear or really, self-realization or reality of the situation. You've got to go in blindly believing, yes, I can get this done. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Before we get to the downfall of Western civilization via fast food industries completely, as my dad put it earlier, talking about the Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers puking all over themselves. I did want to highlight a little something that was going around the internet streets yesterday. Dad, Cameron Brink, one of the young stars in the WNBA right now. We've talked about this draft class and all the star power they've got in it. The former Stanford center who joins a great line of Stanford centers to be drafted by or find their way to the Los Angeles Sparks, along with Chiney and Nneka Ogwumike, has been making the rounds out here doing some PR and doing some stuff around the city, and yesterday got to go and throw out the first pitch at a Dodgers game, and it led to this picture with her and Shohei Ohtani beforehand in the dugout, where you see Shohei Ohtani and her standing by there. There was another one of Cameron Brink seemingly laughing with Shohei standing, smiling with his arms crossed over there, and as many people pointed out, not an interpreter in sight. Like, what did this man manage to do that was so funny in that moment? Now all of a sudden has people wondering if he's playing coy a little bit with us every time he goes out there and says, oh, I need my interpreter to go and handle business here. Because clearly he had something funny in his pocket that got Cameron Brink laughing and giggling in the locker room.
I'm just amazed how they looked eye to eye. I mean, oh my gosh. I remember doing it was either a Chargers or a Rams game out at SoFi after he had signed, and he came out down on the sidelines before the game, and I was over there by him, and I was like, wow, dude is large. And she was standing next to him or looking at him. They're almost looking eye to eye. That is absolutely amazing.
I will say, GoJo, as I analyze this picture, I've done this. Probably half of my Instagram is this, to where it's like, hey, let's pretend we're laughing at something so we don't just take an awkward static pic. It's just, I don't know if that's it, but it's almost interesting. You know, that's just my thought.
Oh, wait,
like, nobody laughs like that.
Do you actually do that? You actually set that up and say, hey, laugh now, we're going to take a picture.
Yeah, it's like, but it's a universal thing. You just know. Okay, let's laugh. Let's look at each other and laugh. It's just, come on, Cedar. Come on.
All right.
You don't know this?
Listen.
No.
I actually did it with you guys. That picture that we took on the couch laughing. I was like, okay, now laugh, and you guys just did it. So.
Oh, that's right. True, she did coach us up on that, as she also had to coach up our entire studio on the amount of pictures to take when you were photographing people to try and get something ready for Instagram.
Yep. That was probably one of like 50. Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. I remember we first sat there and dude took one picture and Claudia immediately said, well, that's not going anywhere.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. Yeah, no. So that's just what I'm assuming went behind that. But
okay.
You know what? That's a great reminder that there are probably 49 pictures that didn't make the cutting room floor there. And Cameron Brink, who has been doing the tour and been going around, and I saw doing a bunch of photo shoots and stuff, definitely knows how to photograph. So you're right. We're probably dealing with someone who's a veteran of the game there, who's just going out there and playing it. So very interesting. And shout out to her, by the way. I saw her on Paul George's podcast the other day. Incredible perspective and poise from someone who is, like we talk about with Anthony Edwards, 22 years old. And the way that they're making young people, Dad, you've covered these sports for a lot longer than I have at this point and been around and see this. So I want you to check me on this. But as someone that was, 22 a lot more recently than you, I don't feel like they were making 22-year-olds that come out with the ability. And Cameron talked about, hey, our draft class is stellar, but it's, by no means heads and tails above others that have come before us. There's great players that have come into the W, and she mentioned it's just circumstances around the league in a way that it's covered that's elevated them and given them more of a platform. I thought she was incredibly gracious the way that a lot of these young women have been, between her and Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, coming into this setting here, and it just feels uncommon to me.
Well, I think this younger generation is exposed to media because they can do it themselves. So they're exposed to being in public and talking. So, and some even that age don't pick it up well, right? And aren't very good at it. But I think there's more reps. I guess that's the way I would put it. They get more reps now at a younger age. So if that ability is there, it's going to come out earlier in them to getting to a 22-year-old that can sound that good and have such great perspective like that.
No, I think you're right. I mean, listen, Cameron Brink, I believe, won a championship with Stanford her freshman year at college, so she's been a star in a scene in the NIL era where you're right. These players are getting more and more reps at being young professionals in their sport than maybe ever before, and so it was just cool to see. She's obviously going to be a huge star around town here in a place like Los Angeles that loves its stars, and instead of focusing on that, guys, Let's focus on the downfall of Red Lobster here, because this really rocked our post-show meeting yesterday, Claudia.
Yeah.
You saw, and I'm sure we're mildly disgusted watching the rest of us wax poetic about the loss and potential bankruptcy of one of America's, I don't even know if I can say finest fast casual dining experience, but it's certainly one of them.
Yeah,
it's
I
one of
don't
them.
I don't even think I've ever drove around and seen a Red Lobster, but we can get to that because we do have a special guest coming. But in case you didn't know, Red Lobster declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy, one of the largest restaurant bankruptcies in recent years. A statement from Red Lobster, though, they said, "We're not going out of business." Quote, "Filing for bankruptcy doesn't mean we're going out of business. In fact, it means just the opposite." Okay, with that, we bring in Red Lobster fan and analyst Brandon Newman. Brandon, break this down for us, please.
Well, honestly, I don't know who to be more upset with. Big Red Lobster, who forced their employees to work on Mother's Day. We all know that's the most trafficked fast casual dining day of the year, only to close the doors the next day. Or the selfish patrons that ate all of the shrimp up in the fourth quarter of 2023 and lost Red Lobster roughly $11 million.
If you're giving free shrimp to the people, what do you expect?
Now, it's not free.
Yeah,
it's $20 all you can eat.
Yeah.
Just to be fair.
$20 all you can eat. And this piggyback, Brandon, off a prior, I believe, all you can eat crab experience that also went heinously bad for them.
Yes, that was in 2003, and they still haven't recovered just yet. But I have some nostalgia for this place, guys. This is the first time I got a chance to experience the first strawberry virgin daiquiri. This is the first time I got to crack some crab legs with that little special tool and get in there with the fork. There isn't a holiday on the calendar, including Juneteenth, that I haven't spent at a Red Lobster.
It's honestly, I think of the Cheddar Bay biscuits first and foremost. Dad, the only place I've ever been to Red Lobster's in South Bend, Indiana. And it's one of the places that gives you the sort of sadistic experience of walking in and immediately seeing your food and making you reckon with your place in the process. Because they put those lobster right out in front on State Street and let you know this is what you're about to eat. You can go pick them out and name it if you want, you sicko.
It's an overload of seafood. There's no doubt about it. And I've certainly been to Red Lobster more than a few times in my day until I've now realized there are many, 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 many places that serve better seafood than Red Lobster. So, but I do agree also, Brandon, Chapter 11 bankruptcy is for protection. So I get what they're saying there as they try and cover their bases.
Well, Brandon, I was going to say, first of all, you look great, by the way. But what does that mean? What does that mean? They're saying it means just the opposite, going off of what Senior just said. Like bankruptcy is good?
Well, as you've seen with Buffalo Wild Wings, it's important to pivot. And that's not often what you find with crustaceans at the bottom of the sea, like the cockroaches that are lobsters. And they're trying to do their best to pivot to serve the more audiences, I guess. They close their doors down. Listen, what I'm trying to say is, by the way, I'm dressed so nicely because this is what I used to wear to Red Lobster, just to be casual and be appropriate to the waiters who wear fancy white shirts. I don't want to get political on this platform, but I am voting for whoever's going to keep Red Lobster's doors open. I just want to say that straight up. Like, if the platform is to keep the claws in the hands of the American people getting mid-grade seafood in the middle of America, then that's my vote.
Nowhere near the ocean.
I know nowhere near the ocean. I always had questions about where exactly they were getting those Red Lobster from, but Brandon's absolutely right. For some candidate out there, as we head into an election year, you've got an opportunity to snatch up a large percentage of the vote in Middle America, and that starts with super producer and Red Lobster correspondent Brandon Newman. Brandon, thank you for dressing up for us and for enlightening this audience and making us aware of what's going on right now, right underneath our noses. And guys, I mean, we've got the Panera being sued for their lemonade right now. Yeah. Wendy's is trying to counter all this with a 50-piece chicken McNuggets bucket. Yeah.
Mike, I'm worried about the trickle down because these places are trying to make it affordable and then they're closing their doors. McDonald's just is offering a $5 value menu right now. I'm worried about the trickle down.
Oh, boy. We're worried about it too, Brandon. This is stuff to keep an eye on here. Open your eyes, sheeple. The apocalypse is nigh.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. I'm very excited to announce our next guest, the voice of the Boston Celtics for NBC Sports Boston. You can find him at ESPN doing Sports Center. He calls college football. He does lacrosse, badminton. What else do you do? Corgi lover. It is Drew Carter, folks.
Ooh, that's at the top of the resume, Claudia. Please put Corgi lover first. But I'm just wondering where my favorite Golic is. Where's Christine?
I know she was talking about you. She heard we had you on, and she did nothing but rave about you. So you've got a big fan.
I'll read you the exact text, Drew, from my mom that me and my dad got this morning. She goes, "Love him when he interviewed me when I was at Heads Up Football when he was at Syracuse. After one interview, I said I knew he was going to be a future star." So my mom, LeBron James style, retroactively saying she knew right away she was hitching her wagon to an absolute superstar.
Oh, wow. That's very sweet. Very nice. Yeah, I interviewed Christine Golic when I was in college, and I had no idea what I was doing. Still don't. Still trying to figure it out. But she was very nice, very gracious. So now I've been on the air with 3 different Golics. So that's got to be a record.
Yeah.
I just have to tell you guys how unfair it was to go to college and be in the same class as Drew Carter and Noah Eagle, who just won an Emmy last night. So, okay, I had to be in the same class as them. That's my calling card. Well, you know who I went to school with?
See, this is the funny thing. It's like in Step Brother or Talladega Nights, where they're talking about their favorite version of Jesus wearing a tuxedo t-shirt. My favorite, we've talked about all these versions of Drew Carter. My favorite version of Drew Carter is wearing pit sharks at the Myrtle Beach Bowl, getting ready to call that one here. The dressed down version of you, I have to imagine that's high on the list of career accomplishments, getting to go down there and really lean into the bit.
That is correct. Yeah, we were, for those who didn't see, but I mean, who didn't see this? This was, everyone was talking about it. We filmed the open of our broadcast in the Ferris wheel on the boardwalk of Myrtle Beach. And we really leaned in. I mean, we were about it. It wasn't like we were just doing it for TV. We went to Ripley's Believe It or Not. Didn't film anything, just wanted to do it because we were totally bought into the whole boardwalk thing. That whole getup, GoJo, probably cost a combined $47 for all 3 of us, Dustin Fox, Stormy Bonatoni, and me, to get sunglasses and tie-dye shirts. And I still, to this day, own both.
That's a beautiful thing. Listen, that's the fun. I mean, they're games we're doing. You got to have a good time going into it. Completely agree with that. I mean, listen, you're still a kid as far as I'm concerned, but I do tell young people who are getting into this business, it's all about reps. Talk about even before Syracuse, when you started getting reps saying, you know what, I know this is something that I want to do.
First reps I got were reading the announcements on my high school news show. Shout out to Wayzata High School. Shout out to Newsbreak. Easily the worst television you'll ever see. Like you see some bad stuff on real TV. Oh my God, cannot even compare to how bad our show was. But it was great, and it was the first experience I got, and I fell in love with it. I remember taking a journalism class in high school and being like, there's no way you can get paid for this, and maybe this is going to be what I pursue. That was pretty soon after I realized I was going to tap out athletically. Not all of us can play sports at the collegiate or professional level. So some of us have to find a different path. So I take that journalism class. I fall in love with it. I remember watching All the President's Men, that Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman movie about the Washington Post journalist who uncovered Watergate. And I was like, this stuff is amazing. Like, I'm going to be ripping darts in the newsroom, drinking black coffee, changing the world. And fast forward 10 years, and here I am talking about this and wearing sunglasses on the Myrtle Beach boardwalk. So pretty similar impact, I would say, for me and Woodward and Bernstein. But then I was like, I want to be a writer, right? After watching that. I went to Syracuse, wanted to do that, found the radio stuff, kind of fell in love with it, transitioned to TV, met great people like Claudia Bellafato, and we had a great time in college. And then that was kind of the path.
We did.
You know what? I like to think for the folks around Boston, you will be changing lives just as much as those folks crushing heaters and black coffee, trying to go out there and uncover major government scandal there. So it's been an incredible rise. It's been fun to watch and obviously bump into you as you've gotten to this point. And now taking over full-time next year, certainly for a legend as the full play-by-play voice for the Boston Celtics. So let's tap into some of this expertise, man. You've been following this team around, calling them for a while now. As you look at game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals from last night, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, it was really a tale of two cities between the end of the fourth quarter and overtime of that game here. How do you assess them, whether or not they can beat the charges of the crunch time issues that have plagued the Celtics team, it feels like, most of the season?
Beat the charges. I mean, the haters and losers, of which there are many, love to just crush the Boston Celtics, right? It's a super team. The path is so easy. How do they not win every game by 20? Folks, this is hard. They're trying to win an NBA championship. The teams they're playing are good, despite the common narrative that, the Red Sea has opened a la Moses and trying to, get his people free. The Celtics, it's not that easy, right? You have to play teams that are fighting for their lives. Like the Cavaliers in Game 5, I thought came out with a bunch of force, a bunch of purpose, a bunch of intention. And it took a really strong performance from the Celtics to win that game and close that series. And it's going to be a similar thing in this one. Now, that being said, I feel like the Celtics in the first 2 games of now all three series have played one kind of stinker. They sort of laid an egg, did it against Miami, did it against Cleveland, and I think the Pacers missed their chance last night. That game was right there for them. They were up by 3 with the ball and under 10 seconds left, and they lost. And this has been a common theme for Pascal Siakam in his career, is getting stuffed into a locker by Jaylen Brown and having his lunch money stolen, because it's happened for an entire game before. I've never seen it happen where one play changes the entire game and it's Brown on Siakam. And when they were trying to inbound, they were trying to get it into Pascal. Jaylen Brown plays defense, a little physical, but hey, it's the playoffs, baby. And they knock it out of bounds. It goes off of Pascal and it's Celtics ball. And by the way, I'm sure Rick Carlisle didn't feel great because he had already used his challenge. I think he would have lost it anyway, but you like to have it there. So anyway, to lose a game on the road against the best team in the league when you're in that situation has got to sting. Especially when Brown, by the way, you're probably thinking I was going to say the shot he made over Siakam at the end. That's another play where he kind of owns Pascal still. And once I got to overtime, it felt like there was no chance Indy was going to win. And I want to give a shout out to the great fans of the Boston Celtics as well, because, I've heard that, the TD Garden, it's not as loud as it used to be, blah, blah, blah. The crowd is so nervous. It's not as loud. It was juiced up in there. And do they get nervous? Are they on pins and needles sometimes? Yes. But for the big plays, it's as loud as any building I've ever heard.
Yeah, it is. And we talked about it earlier. The Pacers threw up all over themselves at the end of that game. That was the game for them to win. Regardless, so next year when the season starts, you're either going to be talking about a team that finally lived up to expectations or fell short yet again. I mean, that's the moniker of this team, right? I mean, it's almost like if they win it this year, it would be more relief before joy, given what everybody's saying about them. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. I've struggled to find the right words for it, but I think that's a good way to look at it. The first 2 rounds have been missing some juice. And maybe it does have something to do with the injuries in the Eastern Conference. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that the Celtics won 14 more games than anybody else in the regular season. It's probably a combination of both. But I remember going on radio in Cleveland, actually with our guy, the aforementioned Dustin Fox, my buddy from Myrtle Beach, and Ripley's Believe It or Not. And they were asking me about the series, and I was being incredibly cocky, like, look, guys, the Celtics are just better. And it really doesn't matter what happens. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I hate to be so boring. You probably bring me on for hot takes, but the Celtics will win this series in 5 games. And lo and behold, that's what happened. And I remember Foxy asking me a question that started with, well, Drew, since this series is so boring and nothing fun is going to happen, let's talk about something else. I kind of felt bad after the hit. I'm like, I really didn't do my job well there. But that was how I felt, because here's the deal. The Celtics this roster is built so beautifully, guys. Like Brad Stevens wins Executive of the Year, and that's the only real award the Celtics get. And you know why? Because they took votes from each other. Like Drew Holiday and Derek White in the backcourt both finished top 8 in Defensive Player of the Year voting. You bring in Kristaps Porzingis, who last year in Washington averaged 23 and 10 rebounds on super efficient shooting. He comes in, he's your third or fourth option. Drew Holiday, an Olympian, is probably their fifth option offensively. So it gives you the luxury of this guy who hasn't done a whole lot offensively all season. Last night he comes out as 26 points, and you're reminded, hey, he's an NBA champion, and he was maybe the second best player on that team a couple of years ago. So all that to say, the team is so stacked, and they have so much playoff experience, and they failed enough. It feels like this is the time. And their best player is now 26, and it seems like people are really hard on Jason Tatum for not getting over that hump yet. When did Michael Jordan win his first? When did LeBron win his first? When did Jokic win his first? Mid to late 20s. That's when you're supposed to do it. And it feels like this is the time.
Right. I feel like what worries a lot of Celtics fans, though, is the fact that you're going to have to pay Tatum because Brown's the highest paid player. You're going to have to pay Derek White. So that's the concern, I think, for Boston fans moving forward. You mentioned Porzingis. What's the deal? We keep hearing maybe game 3, but I feel like you have the real inside. So can you tell us what's going on? Is he going to be back? Give it to us.
Yeah. So last night after the game, this wasn't on TV. I went up to KP and I prayed over him. I touched his calf and I said a prayer. And that's our routine after every game is we both say a prayer and I'm touching his calf, massaging it a little bit.
Ooh.
These are tough, right? And this is the calf injury combined with the fact that what we just talked about, where the Celtics are heavily favored in every series they've played, it makes it a real mystery because I tend to believe, and this isn't inside intel, but just reading the tea leaves and touching his calf every night, I think that he probably could have come back by now if they felt like they really needed him. The latest reporting is that game 4 is the intended timeline. By the way, the verbiage of the reporting of this story has been fantastic. First, you had Woj saying he's going to miss a minimum of several games. What does that even mean? I actually was doing SportsCenter the morning that news came out, and I copied and pasted the phrase minimum of several games into the script, not even thinking about it. And one of our producers was like, minimum of several games, Drew, why did you write that? I'm like, it's a good point, man. I didn't even think that actually makes no sense. So you have that. Then, and now I would say we're at several games now. He hasn't played since April 30th in Miami, or against Miami was the last time he played. It was game 4. And now I'm starting to wonder, how serious is this? Could he actually have come back by now? But I do think if the Celtics had been in jeopardy of losing one of these series, I think he could come back. And I do expect to see him at some point of this series because, and I'm not trying to sound like an arrogant Celtics fan right now. I'm not saying they're treating this series like a ramp up for the finals. It's not the preseason. It is the Eastern Conference Finals. But if they are in position to make it to the NBA Finals, I don't think you want his first game in over a month to be on that stage. You'd like him to play in this series before that one.
Quickly, I looked up the definition of several, and the definition is an indefinite number, more than 2, and fewer than many.
Does it actually say that?
Yes, I'm reading. An indefinite number, more than 2, fewer than many. Because I was going to say, when I hear the word several, I start at 3. And it turns out I'm kind of right because it says more than 2. I say, okay, at least 3 games, which probably would have sounded better than what was said. But there you go. I just, I'm talking to a bunch of professionals here. I just want to sound professional.
Are we still at fewer than many right now? Because it's like 8 or 9. Yeah. That feels like many to me.
I have a headache thinking about that.
Should have many.
I was going to say, dear God, we are doing groundbreaking journalism work. When Drew talked about ripping heaters and drinking black coffee, it was looking up the definition of many on air here on this show. Dear God. You mentioned, though, that looming specter of the Western Conference when it comes to the way Boston might be thinking about Kristaps Porzingis. How much does that worry you, the fact that whoever you get out of the West, whether it's certainly, the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have been led by Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, now certainly Anthony Edwards at the charge, but looking at the bigs in that series, or Lively, Gafford on the Dallas Mavericks side, who have been a revelation for that team inside this season. How much do you worry about, even if he gets time in this series, the matchup coming out of the West almost certainly targeting that area for the Boston Celtics?
Yeah, it's a great call. And that's the biggest issue. And, I think just in a vacuum, regardless of the opponent, the Celtics might not win a championship without him, because he's the difference in this team from years past and this season, where the Celtics obviously shoot a ton of threes. They led the NBA in makes and attempts this year, and that's pretty much par for the course for the past few years. Their answer for when the threes aren't falling this season has been going to KP in the post, where he's one of the most efficient players in the NBA. And I feel like that has sort of seeped into the rest of the team, where Tatum is stronger this year. Seems like he's a little bit more aggressive going to the block and driving. Jaylen Brown is great in the post as well. Even Drew Holiday can put guys in the basket, even though he's only 6'4", but he's really built. So it seems like they sort of take on the personality of Porzingis when he's in there, and there's less settling, and there's more forcing the issue as opposed to hoping shots go in. So you have that aspect where he can kind of unstagnate your offense, not to sound like Charles Barkley and make up words. He can unstagnify your offense. There's that. Plus, there's this fact, guys, where, Al Horford has been amazing in the last couple of games. But in the 2 games in Cleveland, it looked like he was kind of running out of steam. He turns 38 in a couple weeks, and he's in year 17. And I was worried when we were coming back to Boston for Game 5. I was thinking the real impact of Porzingis' injury is that it's putting a ton of miles on Horford. I think he played 40 minutes yesterday. And if he gets time in between games, and once you get to the finals, first of all, if they handle this series like I think they should and will, they're going to have a lot of time off before playing whoever it is in the NBA Finals, because the start date of the finals won't change. It's June 6th no matter what. So if they can get through this and have, several days off, that'll help. But I just think that Horford, he needs a little rest. He barely played on back-to-backs this year. In fact, I don't think he did at all. Those guys kind of alternated who rested on, first and second leg of a back-to-back. And I did start to think it was catching up with him. Then he comes out in Game 5 and is the best player on the floor and, does something that no one in NBA history has ever done with his combination of threes and blocks and offensive rebounds. So I felt like an idiot then. But I do think if you're playing a Dallas or a Minnesota, and those teams are huge and they're young and they're physical, I don't really want my 38-year-old Al Horford to be the only playable center. I really don't. So that's a great point, GoJo. I think that's why they need him back. And I would implore Joe Mazzulla, please, my guy, let's try Tatum at the 5. Let's just see what happens. Just throw something at the wall and see if it sticks, because I don't think we saw that once in the regular season. We saw Tatum play point guard. He started at the 1, but not the 5. The guy's 6'9" and built. Let's just see it. Just see it.
All right, there we go. Listen, you know what? People making the jump from media to coaching is all the rage right now, with JJ Redick maybe getting ready to take the Lakers job. So Drew Carter got a little bit of advice here, and I'm not going to lie, sounds pretty good from where I sit.
Hold on, yeah. Next week, yeah, I can be in LA for an interview. Yeah. Okay. Sounds great. Yeah, thank you.
I'd be a Lakers fan.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I would never do that.
Exactly. I would say everyone listening in Boston right now, just know, all for laughs here. Drew Carter, again, you guys could check him out, doing a phenomenal job at ESPN, NBC Sports Boston, going to be the voice of the Celtics full-time overall from here on out here, and we're all excited for that one and the next time the Myrtle Beach outfit makes an appearance. So, Drew, thanks so much for joining us this morning, man, and I hope that I have now vaulted to the list of your favorite on-air Golics.
Certainly in the top 3. Both of you guys are. That's a problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks,
awesome.
Drew.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate it. I mean, those are just glorious outfits there. And, Dad, listen, as a man that once dunked Oreos and mayo live on air at a bowl game, I can appreciate anybody who just decides to go full sicko.
I appreciate anybody, because I know I love doing it. I know you did. I love seeing Drew do that. I love seeing anybody have a little fun. I mean, let's not be all too serious about a game. Have a little fun and lean into it, which he did there. So wow. I mean, the youth out here, the talented youth is amazing.
I know. It makes me sick. Y'all need to quit it.
GoJo and Golic with more sound from OTAs this week. We've been talking about the arrival of quarterbacks, whether it's rookie quarterbacks or quarterbacks taken in the offseason. And the Steelers have a little bit of a quarterback situation because they have two who could start, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. Here is Fields on this quarterback competition.
I'm definitely, competing. I think, Russ knows that. We're competing against each other every day. Him being out there for me, us we getting better, us pushing each other. So, I definitely don't have the mindset of, me just, sitting all year. So, I'm coming in every day, giving it all I got, and, pushing him to be his best, and he's, pushing me to be my best each and every day.
I mean, that's all you can do is give it all you got. It's just a weird situation. I don't know if you guys can think of one that's similar from past years, but Senior, how do you see this going down?
Well, yeah, I see that with more than a few guys. Zach Wilson, Sam Darnold, guys that were drafted high and starting and being the person that was counted on to be the starter, and then all of a sudden you're in a backup role somewhere. Which mentally can be tough because you got drafted that high to be the man, you were given the chance to be the man, and now you're not the man. So you like what he says because every backup player is one play away from being in there, and the quarterback position is the most important position. So you always have to prepare like you're going to start. But the reality is, if Russell Wilson doesn't get hurt and Russell Wilson is playing well, Justin Fields is not going to see the field this year.
I guess I should have phrased that a different way, and GoJo, I'll send it this way to you. Can you remember a situation like this where you had a player like Justin Fields, who everyone has been sort of waiting for that breakthrough because there was so much hype for him, and then a player like Russell Wilson, who has been severely disappointing with the Broncos and now heading into this situation? I can't remember a situation like that with these two quarterbacks that could start, and it comes down to who do you trust more, I suppose.
Yeah. I think given the differing skill sets, especially at this point in their career, Russell Wilson was never a prolific runner. He was a guy that could always scramble pretty well, very durable. But just thinking about the trajectory of a guy in Russell Wilson who most people still think is a Hall of Fame quarterback, who was a championship winning quarterback, who had this career beforehand, and now is looking over his shoulder at a guy who's incredibly young and talented trying to supplant him in a very different way. Like, you'd have to squint really hard to see it. But the only thing that kind of came to mind in terms of the vibe around camp was, Dad, I think of Lamar Jackson's rookie season, how icy it was between him and Joe Flacco in training camp, where you had Joe Flacco, who was clearly going to be on his way out, had won a championship with that team in particular. So it's a little bit different, but was a guy who you could tell, hey, was starting to give way to it. And we had all those training camp shots of, them trying to work Lamar Jackson into the offense and Joe not wanting to throw him the ball on some of those design gadget plays. It felt somewhat similar, but obviously worlds apart as Lamar Jackson was on his rise as a first-round pick, albeit the second first-round pick in that Ravens class. So, it's hard to find comps for this, Dad. And for this Pittsburgh Steelers team, it's an interesting, not dilemma, because they've been pretty clear that Russell Wilson's going to be their guy, but I have to imagine Arthur Smith, who's going to be their new offensive coordinator this year, has to be salivating at the skill set of Justin Fields, wondering if there's some ways he can work that into an offense that we've seen under Arthur Smith make use of the quarterback's legs in a way that Russell Wilson's not going to be able to give them.
Well, I mean, do you see it like a situation of Taysom Hill coming in for Drew Brees? Right?
Yes.
In New Orleans, where you were able to use that athletic ability. Because you're right, Justin Fields, to have that type of a weapon. And I know he obviously is not in Chicago. I am still psyched to see what he is going to do in this league, be it for Pittsburgh or if it's going to be somewhere else. I am a fan of his, and I still think he is going to be a really good quarterback. I understand the route that Chicago went. For the most part, but I'm excited for this. And I don't know the relationship because, boy, you hear so many things about Russell Wilson, right? Who is always going to, most of the time anyway, going to say the right thing in front of the camera. But certainly his former teammates have questioned the leadership about him as well. And we've seen and heard this before. What do you owe the backup, if anything? The guy's gunning for your job. This guy had been a starter and a high pick in Justin Fields. So that is always interesting what the relationship is. Is it I'll help any way I can, like Kirk Cousins said he would to Michael Penix Jr., or is it others? I think Aaron Rodgers was one who said, hey, you know what, that's not my job. Or I don't know if it was Aaron, so maybe I shouldn't say his name. But there are quarterbacks that have said, not my job. Not my job to bring the next guy along, and I understand that as well. The job of the backup is to watch, especially if you get verbiage from the starter to learn, great, but watch how they conduct themselves if you're a young player and try and learn.
So Ryan Tannehill was the name that comes to mind for me when Malik Willis got to camp there, and he was someone who was kind of publicly a little bit colder in terms of that desire to want to mentor a young player, because I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall. Dead different here because both of these players are trying to come in right now and learn something new. Russell Wilson's not an established Steeler that's watching this new player come into his building. He's trying to go out there and get the best version of himself after career embarrassment in Denver. So I do think there's differences there that would make it understandable. But at the same time, the Steelers, quite literally paying pennies on the dollar for both of these guys, do not owe one of them more than the other. They are not indebted to Russell Wilson for any reason, which again goes back to my point about the way they might structure this offense and what they might have in store for Justin Fields, who had over 1,000 yards rushing in 2022 and is a legitimate threat every time he touches the football in that way. Dad, I think because of that, you'd be foolish not to try and figure out something for him, especially if you see the offense stall at all. Now, they've got the tandem in the backfield of Jalen Warren and Najee Harris that are certainly great there behind an offense that's going to want to get downhill. That's what Arthur Smith wants to do. He's that run and cut outside zone scheme that wants to get people on the moving, give their running backs opportunities to cut back and make big plays. But having Justin Fields in there, especially down in the red zone, like Russell Wilson's not the quarterback he used to be. So I think all of this needs to be on the table.
I think while Pittsburgh is hoping Russell Wilson can catch a little lightning in the bottle of what he was at Seattle, I think overall, over down the line, they're more excited about what they can do with Justin Fields. I really do, because of what he brings to the tables. But you got to believe that you obviously, even though there's not much investment in either one of them right now, you'd love to hit on it. You'd love to bring a guy in and hit on it. So I think they would love Russell Wilson to be the guy. But I'm with you. If you can find a way to get Justin Fields and not kick returning, all right? Not kick returning. That's not going to happen. But find a way to get him involved, because I do think that guy could have some years there in Pittsburgh.
It's fascinating to watch what the Steelers are trying to do right now, because this is a team that's never going to be bad enough because of Mike Tomlin to ever hit a full-scale rebuild. It feels like they're always trying to, they're a playoff team last year. And so all these things are so difficult to try and hit this moving target post-Ben Roethlisberger for them. And because the standard for so long was Lombardi, and now the Stanford, or at least the floor, has been, hey, you're at least over 500 and in contention to make the postseason every year. Can these moves be the difference for them in getting back to playing more meaningful January and February football? I don't know if that's the case yet. I know Mike Tomlin got talked about a lot with his job towards the end of last season in a way that was wild to me. Shout out to Mike T, man. There's been a lot made in the last couple of days of Cam Hayward, their veteran defensive tackle, who's not at OTAs right now. He's got 1 year left on his deal, wants more on that. And there were some reports from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that hadn't been communicated to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Mike Tomlin came out right away. Cam Hayward denied that on his podcast, went at Jerry Dulac, the journalist at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, who had said that. And Mike Tomlin came out right away and said, yeah, I'm not worried about that with Cam. I talk to Cam almost every day, and mentioned that communication and the lines there firmly open. Just one of the many reasons, Dad, why that coach has always, I think, been so well respected by the guys that call that building home.
Yeah, I don't know. One of the most respected, without question, for an organization that doesn't go through coaches is obviously, as we know. We'll see. I want to, in what we think could be the toughest division in all of football, with the 4 teams involved in the AFC North. So, and as you mentioned, 10 double-digit wins and a playoff without really a good quarterback. So let's see if that can be up this year.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. But like you mentioned, Joe Burrow coming back, this division never gives anyone time to really reload and do things on their own time. Coming up next, though, speaking of change, lots of change in the winds for college football. I'll tell you the one headline you really need to be concerned about next here on GoJo and Golic.
here on GoJo and Golic with some interesting news out of college football as the college football world tries to handle this new NIL world. And right now, Georgia quarterback Jaden Rashada is suing Florida coach Billy Napier and booster Hugh Hathcock for fraud and other allegations over a failed $13.85 million NIL deal. The lawsuit claims that Napier told Rashada the booster would wire $1 million on signing day if he signed with Florida. This is intense, GoJo. How do you get around a situation like this? Is this surprising? We know this is sort of the waters you're wading in when you bring money into paying college athletes. So how do you see this one turning out?
Yeah, Claudia, we talk a lot about the need for structure on the team side where coaches and schools are looking for direction because their rosters are constantly in flux and they're always renegotiating. But I would say this moment serves as a reminder that that structure can benefit players in certain ways too, because the gist of this deal, Dad, with Jaden Rashada was he was promised money that didn't materialize. The collective that was supposed to be in charge of this ultimately didn't pull together the funds, and that was why Florida allowed Jaden Rashada to back out of his commitment and ultimately sign with Arizona State for a season before now making his way to Georgia. And so I think that structure and uniformity and how these payouts would come out would prevent a lot. I don't know how this lawsuit is going to work out for him, Dad, because it's going to be based on what he signed and what went on behind closed doors that we don't have access to right now. But it's just another reminder that everyone is still figuring out this in the early on, and promises made aren't always promises kept right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I have no idea. We have no idea how to figure it out. What was said, what was written, what's a contract, what's not a contract. Is there a verbal contract? Who owes anybody anything? All we know is there's a current player suing a current coach. And oh, by the way, Florida and Georgia obviously play all the time. So that will be interesting.
The funniest headline that came out of all of this, by the way, was that Rashada, and this is an exact quote from the article, Jaden Rashada informed Georgia coach Kirby Smart of his intention to file the lawsuit, according to sources, and Smart gave his blessing. Of all of the things that college head coaches talk about having to deal with in this day and age, I never imagined Kirby Smart thought he would have to give one of his players a blessing to sue the head coach of his rival school.
I mean, well, we've seen a whole lot of firsts going on in college the last couple of years. And I don't know about you, Mike, but I do think the next there's going to be more changes. First off, if NIL is going to continue in any form, they're going to need some structure to it. That seems to be the big word. But I feel this is going toward revenue sharing, right? And if it goes toward revenue sharing, you're going to be done with the collectives, which the schools will be happy about because the schools are tired of boosters giving money to the collectives instead of the schools. They'd rather the money go to the schools so the school could use it how they want, not to the collectives that we know is going to players. So I do think one of the next big things is going to be revenue sharing, which is going to basically, I don't know if you agree or not, would knock NIL kind of off course a little bit.
I think they still exist together, and I think there's part of me that wonders if schools would bring a lot of these NIL outfits in-house and just have control over it, because those are people that are already now with a couple of years of job experience of the process that these schools aren't going to have themselves there. I do love the idea, by the way, not to double back too much, but of Kirby Smart being able to use this as a selling point for recruits that if prompted, I will help you sue your former head coach. That's how down I am for the cause. But Dad, no, and even for the schools, revenue sharing, I don't know how much better that makes things. Like now you've got to earmark potentially $20 million a year, a bite out of your ass to give directly to the players. Yeah, you're in control of it, but it's not like it's going to help put up a new building around campus. And that's the nexus or the gist of the other lawsuit that we're talking about now, which is House versus the NCAA that looks like it's nearing settlement. The news overnight, for anyone that's unaware of this, the background, this is basically an antitrust lawsuit against college athletics that would require the NCAA and its member institutions to pay back pay to players who they believe, and the courts are now ready to rule, it sounds like, were unjustly kept from profiting off of the massive television revenue dollars that came into the sports. And so the Big 12 and the ACC have already voted to agree to the settlement here that Dad would bring in, by most people's estimations in the terms of the settlement, true revenue sharing in the world of college athletics, where that number, about $20 million a year per school, being earmarked for the use of name, image, or the use of money going towards players, would have to become the norm. So it is absolutely a change that, if enacted and if these schools and conferences agree, would begin probably in the 2025 football season.
I think that's my point, is because I agree, even revenue sharing, how much does that help? But what it does, it shifts control, right? Because players are going to get money. That's not going away. But now at least it would be more controlled by the schools, which I think is what they want, right? Instead of that player running into the situation that we're running into with the player suing the coach. So money, I guess we're in a situation where they have to figure out the best way to work in harmony together, where the players are going to get a share and the schools have control. Because schools, coaches especially, love control. So money's going to go out, but I think the schools and or coaching staffs and or GMs that are hired by these colleges now want to control that.
From the football perspective, coaches would certainly love that, because coaches in this would get the ability to have more control over this stuff directly. The school would have this underneath their umbrella. All that stuff's a win for them. And for the players, it would be a guaranteed pool of money where this is coming from now. To the Jaden Rashada case, you wouldn't have to wonder if that check's or not when they go put their name, because now it's the school's reputation, not just that collective and donor, but the school's reputation behind the money that they're going to have to put in there. Dad, my fear in all of this, though, because there's still so much that would have to get developed between now and then, because this money is not just for football and basketball. This would, in theory, be for everybody, and how you divvy that up. The schools and the NCAA would also have to pay that back pay and settlement money here in the billions of dollars that would factor into these challenges. And so all of that, how you would divvy this up, would there be a salary cap? All those things are in there. The thing that people, if you're wondering, fans, what of this should I care about? The thing you should be afraid of is, again, and I've said this before, but Ross Dellinger at Yahoo put out another article about it today, private equity people snooping around here at a time where college sports are vulnerable. You're going to have a bunch of these schools, conferences, and people crying poor, talking about all the money that they need to help and run and steady the ship. And you've got private equity people that have been snooping around trying to talk to these schools for a while now, who are going to see an opportunity. And there was a quote in the Ross Dellinger article from one of the people who talked about College Athletic Solutions, which is one of these, they describe themselves as private capital, not equity. They said there's no ownership here. The schools have the freedom to be flexible with $50 to $200 million lump sums of money, but they would like to be advisors and to presidents and athletic directors. All of that. If you believe any of that, I got a bridge to sell you. The scorpion and the frog comes to mind, Dad, where eventually these people are going to be what they are, which is people obsessed with profit margin through ruthless efficiency, no matter what the cost it is to the product itself. And if you're someone that cares about college football in any form, as it changes right now, this is the thing that actually stands to change it in a way that would alter the product beyond what you see it and recognize it as now.
You have to get people to be able to look beyond the wide-eyed look of the amount of money that these individuals are willing to give, right? And to look past that. And because a lot of people will just look at that and say, okay, we'll take it, to look past that and say, all right, what are you giving up? Because I agree. We just want to be advisors. Give me a break. You are now in control. You have now taken control. So this is going to be an interesting game that's being played.
It's control. And I get it. College football is a wagon. Most of sports is a wagon. And these people are trying to make a return on their investment. But at some point, they're going to want to make sure that happens. And college football has been many things. It has never been an efficient process at all. And so I just caution everybody. That's the headline that I would be most concerned about if I'm a college football fan, looking at this vast sea of legal cases and all this money coming out and things that you at times wonder, what effect is it actually going to have on the product? That seems to be the one that still, for me, causes the most concerns and starts to sound the alarms as we look at the future of the sport. All right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the rest of the day. As always, download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out live here Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. If you miss any of that, check us out. Best of GoJo and Golic, noon to 1 p.m. Eastern, wherever you hear VSiN on the radio. And if you missed that, or any of our great guests, thanks to Drew Carter, play-by-play voice at NBC Sports Boston for the Boston Celtics, ESPN play-by-play announcer, for stopping by to talk about Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. If you missed that, you can check us out wherever you get your podcasts or right here on YouTube as soon as we get done. And guys, let's get to this, that, and the third. We talked a lot about OTAs in the NFL today. A tale as old as time. New head coaches coming in at any level of sports and deciding to change things around the locker room. We've seen ping pong tables fall victim to this. Mike McDonald with the Seattle Seahawks took away Pete Carroll's old basketball hoop in the locker room. And now we got this. Jim Harbaugh at the Los Angeles Chargers saying no to music during OTAs, wanting to instead emphasize conditioning because he's a very serious football man who means business. And Dad, how does the thought of silent practice hit you? I feel like you guys probably didn't even have the ability to play music back in the 80s when you were playing.
There was music in the 80s, Mike. I mean, are you serious? We knew how to play music in the 80s. It happened.
Yep, the speaker system.
Didn't happen a lot out on the field, I'll tell you that much. There was no music out on the field. All this stuff does nothing for me. I mean, any coach that comes in, I had a coaching change in Houston. Jerry Glanville ended up being the head coach. He's a guy that left on away games, left 2 tickets for Elvis at every away game. Liked to wear a long black jacket, played that bad boy image. I had Buddy Ryan in Philly, and then it went to Rich Kotite in a coaching change. So Buddy Ryan, just more defensive guy, kind of let you do what you wanted. The Rich Kotite tried to tighten it up a little more than that. I never cared, Mike. It's the way they were. You got Gerard Mayo putting a hoop in New England, and you have Mike McDonald taking a hoop away in Seattle. Doesn't matter to me. Every player knows you're going to be on the team. Maybe that coach will give up on that a little bit. Tom Coughlin, when he coached Jacksonville, and I called their preseason games when I first got out of football, you had to sit with both feet on the floor. You had to have your chin strap buckled at all times on the practice field. And I asked him, I remember in his office sitting there, I said, is it always going to be like this? He said, no, I just want to start this way, get my message in, and then it will start to loosen up a little bit. So let's see if that's the case for some of these coaches and the changes that they're making.
I just like the idea of the brotherhood of the traveling basketball hoop, where we have only X amount of basketball hoops that are allowed to exist inside of any NFL facility at any given time. And so for Mike McDonald to remove theirs allows Gerard Mayo to bring one in, which, by the way, that whole switch where you had Pete Carroll for years, who was the minister of fun and freedom out in Seattle with the way that organization operated, and the New England Patriots under the iron fist of Bill Belichick to now see them basically Freaky Friday their role of basketball hoops and locker rooms is an incredible reminder that 2024 is NFL season is going to be an amazing, amazing year. Speaking of legends who have hung it up, Claudia, let's get to that here. Some interesting sound bites from one of the former greatest competitive eaters this world's ever seen.
Also, I will say with the Patriots, I don't think we're going to have a ton of fun this season, so just let them have fun at practice. That's all I got to say.
Probably gets that.
Yeah, and producer, let me know if we do have sound because I can't see it here, but Kobayashi, no sound. Kobayashi retired, longtime competitive eating champion. He quit saying he no longer feels hungry. And honestly, guys, if I ate almost 18 pounds of cow brains in 15 minutes, which is what he holds the record for, I probably wouldn't be hungry either, Senior.
I don't know. I'm not going to lie. Announcing his retirement, I don't know the last time he ate competitively. I mean, we always saw him in the hot dog eating contest, of which, we always wanted the Joey Chestnut Kobayashi, head-to-head competition, but he's been out of that. So, and I don't know if he's still been in the professional eating. So now he's retiring. So, and I know he's in a documentary, a Netflix documentary, Hack Your Health, The Secret of Your Gut. And basically what did they say? Doctors analyzed his brains, finding that when Kobayashi sees food, all areas of his brain related to nausea are activated. So he got sick of looking at processed food, it seems. But Mike, I didn't think he was competing, or I don't know the last time he competed anyway.
So when ESPN did that 30 for 30 documentary on him and Joey Chestnut's rivalry, they pointed out that after he had left Major League Eating over some, business discrepancies essentially between the two entities, that he had still, I think, been doing some competitive eating feats over in his native country of Japan, but outside of that, had not been nearly as prominent on the Major League Eating circuit since then. And so I don't know when his last event was, but yeah, now 46 years old, he said basically, he's like, his quote was, "For the last 20 years, I have been in this field. I worry about the consequences of my decision. But most importantly, I want to repair my brain and gut health." Now, who knows what his relationship is financially with the documentary coming out, and obviously wanting to stay on message with that. But it is also understandable. We talk about every sport potentially having long-term ramifications, and the amount of food these guys jam into their gullet, absolutely, you would not be surprised to hear that it has an effect on the way that your body functions overall that you'd have to reckon with at some point.
Yeah, it is. What are the I'd imagine that'll be the next study, long-term effects of Joey Chestnut, 20 years from now, of what's going on with his body.
Not good.
You want to talk about someone that needs to donate their body to science. We need to figure out exactly what made the world's foremost eating machine of my entire lifetime. Claudia, this is a great segue to the third. Let's talk about cheese addiction.
This is one I can relate to. I am lactose intolerant, but if you give me a block of cheese, that thing's going down. And a woman in New York spent $10,000 on cheese rehab. She said her cravings began junior year at New York University. Spring 2018, she said she would binge almost daily on the cheapest bricks of white cheddar and parm she could find. And then she elevated to 5.5 bricks of cheese a week during her addiction. And I found this quote, which I can relate to, because I did too live in Midtown at a point in my life. And she said, "I would literally just eat a block of cheese with my hands, often while sitting on the floor of my Midtown apartment alone in the dark." Like, I get that, man. I get that. I feel that.
And then somebody found a way that said, "Yeah, we'll take your $10,000 to help you stop eating cheese." Yeah, sure. Okay. So let me ask real quick, Claudia, let me start with you. If one day we said, "Oh yeah, did you hear Claudia was addicted to X food?" and we'd all go, "Yeah, we get it. We understand." What would that food be that you get addicted to?
It would literally be cheese. Like when I was at Nesson and we gave our top 5 foods, like for Thanksgiving, Christmas, a cheese board, I will hammer that thing all day. I love cheese, yeah.
Wow.
Cheese is great.
Wow.
It's one of those things that, Dad, I think you appreciate a lot as a kid. Like, I remember growing up, we had the Kraft singles that would come in the individual plastic wrapper that's like not actual cheese the way that you would buy at a deli or a store counter.
No.
But was always in my fridge as a kid and was great. And I used to just walk by and take out a slice of that at a time and just sit around and nibble on cheese like I was a little mouse. And then as you grow up, you are honestly, our generation was sort of charcuterie doped at an early age by Lunchables, because that's basically all those things were charcuterie boards for kids. And so it's no wonder now that Big Charcuterie is able to make so much money with all these high-end businesses where you can get them catered in for parties, and there's people that specialize in making the boards like that. And my whole generation's like, hell yeah, pass the Capri Sun, because this is all we know.
Yeah, your brother-in-law Ben eats charcuterie boards like they're appetizers. It's ridiculous how that goes. For me, I would either be, if someone said, "Oh, Golic's addicted to cake," nobody would be shocked. It would be cake. Or, man, when your mother makes the taco salad here, that dip that we use when she makes it, oh my God. I just stand at the counter and just keep slopping that down. So I'm full before any dinner's even ready.
That's healthy though. That's good.
Is it? Is it?
I don't know. I haven't seen it, but now I want it. That sounds delicious. Better than cheese.
I was going to say,
it's so good.
It's better than all the I mean, everyone knows mine. I'm online shooting sugar into my veins for the masses almost weekly at this point. I walk by an ice cream shop and my body starts to tingle and magnetize towards it. I can't help myself. I am the son of a type 2 diabetic who's the son of a type 2 diabetic here. It is quite literally in my blood. If we have made our way into your blood, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.